I love the pressure of being live. I feel like we're doing a job that matters.
You're live with Lucy Hockings on BBC World News.
Hello, this is Impact. I'm Yalda Hakim. The hacked Chinese police files revealing the human cost of Uyghur detention in camps, agreeing that changing the status quo by force after Russia's invasion of Ukraine should never be tolerated. And the oil industry workers preparing to transform to a renewable energy future. That's all coming up here on Impact.
These are the faces China never intended us to see from inside its system of mass incarceration in Xinjiang. The government has long denied it's running detention camps for Uyghurs, insisting instead they... And with mounting criticism over the camps, the authorities have taken journalists on tours, showing them Uyghurs celebrating their culture and, they say, being guided away from extremism.
Yes, this is
about China's narrative.
You have police officers in heavy riot gear standing next to some of the men. Some of the men have their arms in a funny position as if they were handcuffed. So this is really very powerful about the image material. And I was looking through these images and take a break. I was overwhelmed.
The hacked files also contain hundreds of spreadsheets, row upon row of draconian jail sentences, often targeting expressions of Islamic faith as a parallel method of verify the data, showing it to contain real people. Mahmoud Toti, for example, knew his eldest son had been jailed, but the database tells him for how long? 15 years for terrorism offences. The embassy in the US issued a statement saying that in the face of the grave and complex counter-terrorism situation in Xinjiang, the authorities had taken a host of decisive, robust and effective de-radicalisation measures so that people could live.
Well, earlier I spoke to Dr. David Tobin, a lecturer in East Asian Studies at Sheffield University, who has peer-reviewed the report. Have a listen.
Well, these provide more evidence of what we did know, that there is genocide taking place in the Uyghur home. Trove of information on local implementation. What we're seeing is strong evidence of how cadres and security personnel are forced to basically obey commands from Xi Jinping and implement these orders.
And do they...
Shackles if needed. So most of it is really
and that really
focused on that.
is one of the most disturbing things that's come out of this shoot-to-kill order.
Yes, it's not shocking as an analyst to know that this is there, but it's shocking to see it written down. The responsibility for these practices goes all the way to the top.
Yeah, and I suppose the Chinese government continues to maintain that this camp is more a re-education, de-radicalization centre.
Well, there's two ways to look at that. One, that party state means by de-radicalisation, it means cultural assimilation and genocide.
Yeah, so in many ways they do believe that these people that are being rounded up simply because of their faith are there to be genuine. David Tobin there. Now, the United States President Joe Biden has said there was no change to a US policy of strategic ambiguity on Taiwan. He's made the remarks in Tokyo during a meeting with the leaders of Japan, India and Australia, which are collectively... Joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Michael Green, Senior Vice President for Asia at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He was previously Director for Asian Affairs at the White House's National Security Council. Thank you so much, Mr. Green, for joining us here on the...
A grave threat to U.S. interests. Well, in the years since, the capability of China to attack and signals that perhaps there's a willingness to attack have increased many-fold. And so what you heard from President Biden was not a change in policy so much as a change in tone. I think that's too far. We don't have a security treaty with Taiwan that's been ratified by the Senate. But I think the core of the Taiwan Relations Act, arguing and asserting that an attack on Taiwan would be a grave threat to our interests, is more true than ever. And by the way, it's true for Japan states, and increasingly polls show where the public is and U.S. allies.
What would a firm response from the U.S. look like?
Well, this is why this gets so tricky, because China has a variety of tools it's using to.
So if there was a war between the US and China, would you feel confident that the United States would be in a position to be a victor or would win that war?
At CSIS 2 years ago, we surveyed if China blockaded Taiwan, how much risk would we take to break the blockade? So I have no doubt, and the Congress is very clear, and President Biden now, there would be a U.S. response. But exactly what it looks like really depends on the scenario.
I mean, the United States ultimately didn't win when it came to the Taliban.
Yeah, but, Afghanistan was at the far end of American interests, and the American public had soured on our deployments there. But a much harder military problem, too. The Chinese are a peer competitor of the United States.
Indeed. Michael Green, fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Stay with us here on Impact. Still to come, how
modern benefits, advocate for pay equity, and turn jobs into careers. HR empowers others to not only dream of change, but to create it. The actions of a few affect the lives of many. Join Sherm's global
part of the energy transition. Well, as part of the BBC's Future of Oil Day, our reporter Kevin Keane is in Aberdeen in the northeast of Scotland for us now. Kevin, over to you.
Yes, right, that's right. Welcome to the port of Aberdeen, as it's now. At the moment, there's being built a new harbour, and that will be to take in the much bigger ships, deeper ships that are needed to service the offshore wind farms that are expected to grow up in the coasts around here over the next few years and decades.
Aberdeen Harbour has been the beating heart of the oil and gas industry for many decades now, but even it's changing to make room for these new industries, not least the growing number of wind farms that are cropping up along the east coast.
Production's changed.
What does that transition mean for jobs in a place like Aberdeen? Can there be enough jobs created to replace the jobs that will be lost?
Absolutely, we're quite convinced about that.
Others, though, say that won't be the case across the industry.
We've made investments in new facilities specific to the renewables industry, for example.
Aberdeen's a city trying to shake its tag as Europe's oil capital in favour of Europe's energy capital. But while oil peaked...
Control tower at Aberdeen Harbour, and this is where on the top floor, 2 floors above me, a team of people control exactly what vessels go in and out of the harbour day and night. And you might be able to see one of those oil supply ships, the Sea Flyer. Harry and Michelle. Michelle, first of all, you used to work in oil. What made you change?
Well, I was looking for a change. I'd been working in the same type of job for about a decade, and I knew that renewables was going to be the future, and I wanted the discipline is the same, and it's no different from changing employer or even just changing between similar industries. So it was quite easy and easier than I expected.
Harry, is it much of a change for you from working in oil? You used to go out off
here daily, but in terms of scopes, very similar. Construction, commissioning works, very similar skill sets. Slightly different certification, as you mentioned, but those are all roadmaps that can be developed, and guys can find that out online largely.
Are you finding many people are doing what you've already?
You wouldn't have found maybe 5-10 years ago. So it's definitely a growing trend.
Michelle, we've seen boom and bust times over recent years, not least 2016 when there was a big oil downturn, the price of oil crashed. Now, of course, we're seeing it sky high.
Anything really into a success. We just need to put our minds to it.
Are many people already doing what you initially set out to do?
Oh, I think so. I mean, for me, last year when I started in renewables, there was just me in the office, and now we've outgrown the seats.
Following the oil and gas footsteps, and Aberdeen is quite a knowledge hub, and we've had the ScotWind leasing, similar English version of that. There's obviously the UK is one of the leaders in terms of offshore wind, going into floating wind. The global market is enormous, so we're really at the fulcrum of the industry, and it's quite an exciting place to be currently. And so putting large bits of steel in the ocean to generate energy is really what large oil and gas can do very well. So the transferable skill set is enormous, and it's something we really need to grasp hold of and not reinvent any wheels unnecessarily.
And Michelle, there'll be young people thinking about what their career
and really make both industries fantastic.
And if someone starts their career now in oil and gas, that doesn't mean that they're going to have a short-lived career. You think transition will become easier?
Oh, I think transition is definitely going to be easier, and there may even be, a flux between the two.
At the end of this decade, more than half will be in renewables, and that will be the tipping point, the shift away from the point where this is known as an oil city, the oil capital of Europe, and will become what's known as the energy capital of Europe, and that is the ambition.
Replacing them with Wi-Fi hotspots in 2015, which allows people to charge their devices and make free phone calls. People gathered to use their new phones to film the last old phone taken away. And we'll be back.
But still some showers in the forecast. Further south, we've got the southwest monsoon slowly progressing northwards across the southern Bay of Bengal, pushing into southern parts of Sri Lanka, Myanmar as well. So bringing some heavy downpours there through the course of so some respite from the searing heat that we had earlier in the week. Further south, a few showers for Kerala, perhaps the Maldives catching one or two, and for southern Sri Lanka, some heavy showers and some thunderstorms. Largely dry though for the likes of Andhra Pradesh, but we're seeing some showers for Tashkent, but hotting up in Karachi. Bye-bye.
BBC experts check the facts behind the stories making the headlines. Go to the BBC Reality Check. Get the facts straight.
Now showing on BBC Real.
La banqueta. En ella podemos ver los emblemas de poder de la mujer argárica, pero lo realmente emblemático es la diadema de plata. Entonces nos preguntamos si esta mujer pudo gobernar, vivió quizá en una sociedad patriarcal.
To take Kiev not only left burned out tanks around the capital, the bodies of hundreds of its soldiers were also abandoned here. Weeks later, Ukraine says Moscow shows no interest in getting them back. For more, join me, Sarah Rainsford, here on BBC World News.
Of workers and warnings of recession, world leaders are gathering in Davos, and the meeting's founder tells me how they can fix the problems. And the head of the International Monetary Fund gives me her view on the outlook. Join me, Aaron Heselhurst, on Talking Business Weekly, here on BBC.
This is BBC World News. I'm Yalda Hakim. The headlines. Thousands of photographs in hacked Chinese police files handed to the BBC revealed the human cost of Uyghur detention in camps.
Now on BBC World News, the latest business news from across the globe. World Business Report.
Fears of mass famine. The European Union warns that Russia is deliberately targeting grain supplies in Ukraine as the war pushes the world into a food crisis. And delisting Didi. Shareholders are under pressure from Beijing, voting. Hello, I'm Ben Boulos. Very warm welcome to World Business Report. The United Nations has described Russia's blockade of Ukrainian ports as a declaration of war on global food security, which could push tens of millions of people.
And Russian warships in the Black Sea are blockading Ukrainian ships full of wheat and sunflower seeds. The consequences of these shameful acts are there for everyone to see.
Where the pinch is coming from? Is it in the production of the food products, or is it getting them out of Ukraine?
Hello, everyone. Firstly, we should split two different marketing years. In Greece, brought numbers to exports about 25 million tons of wheat and about 33 million tons of corn. Mostly sunflower seeds, which Ukraine produced, crushed in Ukraine and sell to globe. Crop is locked in Ukrainian silos. If we talk about next season, which will start in a few months, Ukraine probably can produce still another record, 100, definitely 200. If we talk about numbers, we can say that from 1 kilo of wheat, we can bake a bread which is enough to feed 4 people daily.
Okay.
Now you can use your calculator in it.
It's only been 11 months since the company's $4.4 billion listing debut in the US, which had gone ahead despite concerns around data security from Beijing. Let's go to New York and our North America business.
Day trading touched into a bear market, some big falls happening. And then we thought, wow, the weekend happened and everyone sort of recovered. But again, on this Tuesday morning, if you look at the way that shares have opened, they are again. Really what we're seeing is that a lot of investors are moving away from anything really very risky, worried about the economic impact of the war in Ukraine, worried about rising interest rates, worried about, inflation and the other IPO went off, and they were already investigating and looking for information with regards to the $4 billion that it had earned when it went public. So, it is unclear just, which pressure from which company really sort of
Concerns have been raised that the number of new green jobs won't match those lost as part of the energy transition. As part of the BBC's Future of Oil Day, our environment correspondent Kevin Keane reports.
It's a familiar sight.
Not least the growing number of wind farms that are cropping up along the east coast.
Change is on the horizon here, but it is still an oil town, and that's by far the biggest source of employment, although the numbers are gradually declining.
About that.
Others, though, say that won't be the case across the industry, with these requiring fewer people to run them than a big oil installation. There is evidence that Aberdeen is serious about embracing alternative place that wants to let go of it entirely anytime soon. Kevin Keane, BBC News, Aberdeen.
One more story I want to mention before we go. Airbnb says it's shutting down its local business in China. The home rental company is overseas. As ever, you can reach me and most of the team here on social media. You'll find me on there at Ben M. Boulos. That is World Business Report for now. Thanks for watching.
At 70 years, Con was founded with a vision to always remain a step ahead. 70 years on, we remain leaps ahead.
From being one of the leading gear manufacturers in Asia with a pan-India and global network, we continue to get a step closer to our customers.
That's you can rely on.
Hello, I'm Holly Hamilton and this is Sport Today, live from the BBC Sports Centre. Coming up on the programme, tennis's world #2 final. And Jamaican swimmer Michael Gunning says he wants to be part of the change around diversity and gay rights as he announces his retirement. In Paris, it'll be Laszlo Dier or Ricardas Berankis next. Denmark's Holger Rune has pulled off one of the best wins of his career after knocking out the 14th seed Denis Shapovalov in straight sets. The team champion Helena Ostapenko is safely through after a 6-1, 6-4 win over Italy's Lucia Bronzetti. Now, she has been struggling for form recently, but this win ends a 5-match losing streak, and she'll play Alice Cornet. Players. He will forfeit the 2,000 ranking points he won there last year, and having missed the Australian Open too, well, he could end up losing his world #1 ranking.
On a personal level, of course, without getting, when there is a mistake happening, and there was from the Wimbledon side, then we have to show that there's going to be some consequences.
Now, the BBC has learned the UK government is set to Ministers are said to be in intense discussions with their counterparts at the European Commission to provide them the assurances they need to approve the deal. Bangladesh have been bowled out for 3-6-5 on day 2 of the second and to a 102-82 win over the Miami Heat. Now, with home advantage, the Celtics started strongly and raced into an early lead. Jason Tatum top scoring with 31 points. And it wasn't all about the basket.
You know, because tonight was essentially something like that.
In the Stanley Cup playoffs, Tampa Bay are through to the Eastern Conference Finals. The defending champions beat the Florida Panthers 2-0 to complete a 4-0 series sweep. Now, as the Panthers have an empty net, the Lightning will face either the New York Rangers or the Carolina Hurricanes next, as they aim to win the Stanley Cup for the 3rd straight year. Over in St. Louis, Colorado Avalanche beat the Blues 6-3 to take a 3-1.
The next challenge and, yeah, ready for what's next.
How did coming out change your career and change your life?
I think, you know, for so long I was worried about what other people was going to say, you know, kind of what the reaction would be. Would I get countries? It's still illegal. There's still, you know, imprisonment. And, you know, I want to be part of that change. I want to try and just help where I can.
Just before we go, you need to see this. Now, a baseball fan in Cincinnati had a beer. He probably will remember doing that at home. From all the team here, enjoy your day. Bye-bye.
Welcome to the grand side of Grill.
This is a residential building. There's a real sense that the danger, the conflict is coming closer, and a feeling here.
I understand the consequences of my decision. And one of the consequences of my decision was not going to Australia, and I was prepared not to go.
Journalists are under attack in ways that we've never experienced before.
I bring that part of my
and they will also die. I can't understand a word.
When big names talk, they talk to the BBC.
This programme asks plain questions with the help of the unrivalled range of BBC. Also draw my time reporting on global conflict and meeting countless heads of government. Frontline experience that helps me know who to talk to and who to listen to, meaning our analysis is objective.
The Travel Show, sponsored by Turkish Airlines.
We're in Cambodia, at the vast and ancient Buddhist.
We got to deal a lot with our life situation at the moment. So many people lost jobs.
In May 2020, we went to Angkor Wat to see the impact for ourselves. 2 years later, we've returned to catch up with the people we
just like many other people who survive from tourist industry as well. Yeah, it was something that we never encountered before in our whole life. It's hard to describe. I really miss the walking through the temple, my explanation to people, and also the ways I try to make people happy.
We had to wait for the queue, but now it's okay, not mandatory. We can go, we can remove anywhere, anytime. កំឡុងពេល COVID នេះជាក់ស្ដែងពួកខ្ញុំនៅធ្វើការជាហើយយើងអត់មានបញ្ហារឿងបាត់ចិត្តទេហើយគិតទៅពួកខ្ញុំចំណាងព្រោះទោះបីជា COVID ខ្លាំងប៉ុណ្ណាក៏ពួកខ្ញុំនៅតែមានការងារធ្វើនៅតែមានប្រាក់ខែទោះវាមិនច្រើនក៏យើងអាចចិញ្ចឹមគ្រួសារយើងបានប៉ុន្តែ
we, you know, have like a good sign. Nice people, we have beautiful temples and a lot of beautiful places around Cambodia.
The Travel Show, sponsored by Turkish Airlines.
Policy against prisoners trying to escape. We'll hear from a China analyst on what, if any, is a likely response from Beijing. 3 months on since Russia invaded Ukraine, President Biden calls the war a brutal, unprovoked global crisis. Welcome back to the programme. Thousands of photographs from the heart of China's highly secretive system on mass incarceration.
To see from inside its system of mass incarceration in Xinjiang. The government has long denied it's running detention camps for Uyghurs, insisting instead they are vocational schools. She was 73 at the time of her detention, the youngest just 15. The Uyghurs, with their Turkic language, Islamic traditions and roots in a region with a history of separatism and violence, have long faced cycles of unknown, were first passed to Dr. Adrian Zenz, a Xinjiang scholar who in turn shared them with the BBC. And they raise serious questions about China's narrative.
You have police officers in heavy riot gear standing next to some of the men. And go somewhere else and take a break. I was overwhelmed.
The hacked files also contain hundreds of spreadsheets, row upon row of draconian jail sentences, often targeting expressions of Islamic faith. As a Mahmoud Toti, for example, knew his eldest son had been jailed, but the database tells him for how long? 15 years for terrorism offences, although as evidence and indoctrination of a people, not for what they've done, but for who they are. John Sudworth, BBC News.
Now, to find out more about the detention camps, I've been speaking to Dr. David Tobin, a lecturer in East.
There's a human side to this story, really showing actual real people, not just spreadsheets and databases and ID numbers, but real faces and the real suffering of people, as you've stated, as young as 15. So there's a real human story that this reaches people that are not familiar with this story, do not understand why this is happening. And then for analysts, there's a treasure trove of information on local implementation. What we're seeing is strong evidence of how cadres and security personnel are doing the shoot-to-kill orders and saying use ankle shackles if needed. So most of it is really focused on that.
One of the most disturbing things that's come out of this shoot-to-kill order.
Yes, it's not shocking as an analyst to know that this is there.
A re-education, de-radicalization centre.
Well, there's two ways to look at that. One, that's simply propaganda. It's a lie. We know that. We know that from testimonies. We know that from the figures of number of people who are rounded up. But it's also defined by the party state as a security problem, and that's what the party state means by de-radicalisation. It means cultural assimilation and genocide.
Yeah, so in many ways they do believe that these people that have been rounded up simply because of their
the cultural difference that Uyghurs see themselves as a people, it defines that itself as the problem. It does not actually believe that they will become terrorists.
That was Dr. David Tobin there. Now, it's been exactly 3 months since Russia invaded Ukraine. To shell Severodonetsk and Lyshansk, two adjacent cities that they're trying to surround. The offensive is the main focus of Russia's attempts to capture the last part of the Luhansk region as part of its campaign to control the wider Donbass area. Ukraine's foreign minister repeated calls for allies to speed up weapons deliveries. Well, earlier I spoke with our correspondent Joe Inwood in Kiev. He said Russian forces are experiencing some successes.
The effort of the Russians now is on encircling these cities. Severodonetsk, of one prominent politician here, create a new Mariupol, basically try and create a new siege in the east of this country around the towns of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, and try and starve out and pound with artillery the Ukrainian defenders that are there.
Joe, and just very briefly, we heard
have estimates of Russian numbers, but we haven't, as I said, for Ukrainians. And obviously with these numbers, it's always difficult to know because people want to release what they want to release for operational security reasons. But the fact that he admitted that, it was in a press conference with the Polish Prime
in attacking Kyiv. He's moved to the east. It seems he wants to solidify Donetsk and Luhansk. And we have two strong-willed people in Putin and also President Zelensky, and the damage are going to be very, very significant.
As you say, I mean, it does appear from all the intelligence that this is going to be a long slog, and we're only a couple of months into it. But if you were to reflect, could anything have
in terms of poking the bear? My own view is this has been something that's been in Putin's head for a long, long time, 10, 20 years. He is compelled right now and obsessed with Russian history many times across Ukraine. So Ukraine is sort of the centerpiece, if you will. So in that regard, I'm not surprised. I think we could do the forensics, and we probably will. Could it have been avoided? I'm not really sure part of it, but I'm not sure it could have been avoided.
Then what is the end game here?
I think that's a great question, Yelda, and I think it's an important one that we think about that, and that there are individuals, even quietly, looking at large nuclear holocaust, quite frankly. And so, my sense is I'm not sure whether it's a ceasefire or a line of control or something out east. Again, Zelensky doesn't want to give up. They're going to need to do that.
Admiral Mullen, you've just mentioned a potential for, or to avoid the potential for a nuclear holocaust. But is this something that keeps you up at night, the fear of the involvement of nuclear weapons in this conflict?
In time, but you just can't count it out.
That was Admiral Mike Mullen speaking to me there a little earlier. Meanwhile, inside Russia, the country's leading opposition figure, Alexei Navalny, has told a Moscow court that President Putin is a madman who decided to thwart his political ambitions. Appearing from the maximum security jail via video link, Navalny said President Putin would suffer an historic defeat. Stay with us here on Impact. Still to come, how this Nigerian queen combines her humanity.
BBC experts check the facts behind the stories. Get the facts straight.
Of Kabul. Their report calls for the resignation of the Foreign Office's top civil servant who stayed on holiday as Kabul fell. Our correspondent Paul Adams has this report.
The West's withdrawal from Kabul was a catastrophic failure of intelligence, diplomacy and planning. Knowing that American forces were soon going to leave, the report says the government failed to respond.
Well, it's clear that what we could have done, really from 18 months out.
And if I had my time again, I would have come back from my leave earlier. Today's report suggests Mr. Barton should consider his position. It says many of the British officials and soldiers sent to try and manage the terrible situation at Kabul airport. The report urges the government to commit to a serious strategy for dealing with Afghanistan in the future. A failure to do that, it says, would abandon Afghan women and girls to the biggest single reversal of rights in a generation. Paul Adams, BBC News.
Passed on, which was that the conventional wisdom amongst politicians and political journalists was that he was probably out of danger with the police investigation coming to a head. But these photos and the witness statements that we've heard there collectively of misleading Parliament, that he told Parliament several times during 2021, look, all the regulations, all the rules were followed. Well, we've heard now from his own inside team that they thought that that was utterly incredible.
Yeah, indeed. And now we're hearing
senior independent official. She may sort of join the dots in a way that could be potentially very uncomfortable for the Prime Minister, saying there was something about the culture, something about the nature of his leadership and other senior officials in Downing Street.
Dami Aduwalu from BBC Africa's What's New programme about how she's embracing her new life and also about a very special skill she's brought to the kingdom.
From beauty queen to royal queen.
Thank you for letting us into your kingdom.
First of all, it's something that I'm really proud of because the first time I stepped foot in Africa, I'm married to a king and I have a long-standing road to go ahead and for Etioni and our people. And through the transatlantic slave trade, some of even my ways would come from Yoruba traditions. Yeah. So it's been a beautiful adjustment. And to be honest, I feel like as long as you're willing to give to the people, then it makes...
Big skill of ventriloquism.
I started doing it for humanitarian reasons. When I say humanitarian, I mean to make a difference for over a decade now. So I had retired from acting as well as performing full-time. But the ventriloquism is something... What? The bullies became my friends because Gracie the pig they loved and we became friends after.
But is the acting life truly over for Queen Angelique?
Actually, His Majesty and I are working on a few film projects and some animations as well as telling...
Something you'd consider being part of?
You know, something, any great story. As the palace has let me know that they support me doing things that make a difference. So if it's a beautiful story and it happens to be Nollywood, definitely we're open-minded.
Across parts of northeast India and Bangladesh have caused some devastating flooding problems. Things are looking a little bit dry there, thankfully, for the rescue effort, but still some showers in the forecast. Further south, we've got the southwest monsoon slowly west of India, so some respite from the searing heat that we had earlier in the week. Further south, a few showers for Kerala, perhaps the Maldives catching one or two, and for southern Sri Lanka, some heavy showers and some thunderstorms. Largely dry, though, for the likes of Andhra Pradesh, but we're seeing...
Stories of the day. Reality check. Get the facts straight.
I'm very interested in the connection between people, and I love...
Fluid, dynamic, androgynous, he's now at the forefront of a new generation of progressive choreographers who are drawing new audiences to contemporary dance.
If you can embody that...
Whatever their method, they only had one chance to get that right.
Inspiring arts and culture on BBC World News.
Hello, I'm Ross.
Piece the story together with Roz Atkins, Outside Source on BBC World News.
Russia's failed attempt to take Kiev not only left burned out tanks around the capital, the bodies of hundreds of its soldiers were also abandoned.
States, India and Australia have concluded a summit in Tokyo. They agreed that changing the status quo by force after Russia's invasion of Ukraine should never be tolerated. The UK's withdrawal from Afghanistan last year was a catastrophic failure and a betrayal of Britain's allies.
The Ukraine invasion has presented NATO with its greatest challenge in a generation. At NATO HQ, they claim support for Ukraine has unified and reinvigorated the alliance to the point where Sweden and Finland urgently want to join. NATO had, in effect, done nothing to help Ukraine. What's your response to that?
So first, I would like to just say that I had great respect for the government line at the battlefield every day. And then since the invasion, all other NATO allies have also stepped up their support. So NATO and NATO allies are providing unprecedented support to Ukraine, and we are ready to do so for the long haul.
Right. I think a coherent group of 30 members, Mr. Kuleba sees increasing division and real disagreement about what should be the level of support for Ukraine.
Well, NATO has these individual allies, so this is also very much the way NATO works, is that we are totally dependent on the contributions from different individual allies to different missions, operations and activities we do in different ways. So
approaches taken within your membership to support in a moment, but just I want your assessment of the battlefield. You are at NATO HQ, you've got all sorts of intelligence analysts looking at what's unfolding, particularly in the east of Ukraine, day by day. What is your latest assessment?
Around Kiev, that was a huge victory for Ukraine, and then also around Kharkiv, and that Ukrainian offensive in Donbass has stalled. But heavy fighting is going on. We see this undecided situation, and therefore allies are ready to provide continued support to Ukraine.
President Zelensky said that up to 100 of his soldiers are dying every day right now, particularly via weapons, is very urgent. But it does not seem as though many of your members see that urgency.
I always understand the need for stepping up and do even more. Allies have stepped up. Airbase at Ramstein, where NATO allies and also some partners coordinate their efforts, and where the message has been that we need to also provide more advanced and large-scale support to Ukraine.
$3 billion, much of it military assistance. The United Kingdom, over €2 billion worth of military assistance already. Then one can look at very significant military powers like France within the NATO membership, where, as I understand, have the bully pulpit. You are the Secretary General of NATO. What is your message right now to the French?
My message to all allies is that we should provide support to Ukraine, and I welcome that allies have provided air equipment to more modern NATO standard equipment, and allies are...
Why are countries like France and Italy not listening to you then?
But I will not go through each and individual allies, but all allies are providing.
You know, again, on sanctions, I mean, it's not necessarily NATO's immediate remit, but you have to look at the overall political climate. You know, on sanctions, while some countries like Poland and Bulgaria have absolutely refused to bow to Putin's demand that they pay.
I think we have to be honest that when it comes to energy, that has proven to be a particular challenge, because too many European allies are too dependent on Russian energy. And therefore, they are working hard on how to reduce energy dependencies, on make sure that we are making more progress on also imposing sanctions on energy.
Right. Isn't the truth, which perhaps you don't really want to engage with, that there is a fundamental difference within your membership between those countries who want to go, to quote him, on not humiliating Vladimir Putin? That's the reason why we can talk about all of the differences and divisions within NATO, isn't it?
But of course, when we are 30 allies, you will always find different views, nuances, perspectives on big challenges, challenging situations as we see in Ukraine.
But this isn't, Mr. Secretary, regime to a point when they can never, ever again contemplate doing something like this invasion.
But my main message is that despite differences, we all agree on the main message to Russia and to Ukraine.
The right to define exactly when and how this war should end. And if he says we push on with this war, we don't negotiate, we continue until we've liberated every inch of our territory, including
and other types of support, and also actually impose sanctions on Russia since 2014. And we are ready to continue and have stepped up support to Ukraine. We discuss and address these issues together. And what we are doing, self-defense is enshrined in the UN Charter. So, of course, we support that right.
Right, but if you're prepared then to back with this military assistance that you're talking about in an open-ended fashion, back maximalist positions defined by Zelensky, you're going to think that sending more weapons to Ukraine is the right thing to do. Are you worried about public opinion in Europe?
What we have seen is a very strong unity across Europe, across the political spectrum, across...
What they want to see is a very quick turn to dialogue, negotiation, and some sort of peace settlement.
But also Italy has been part of the sanctions. Also Italy has been part of the efforts by NATO allies and the European Union to want to be part of it. That's exactly what President Putin is violating.
In the early weeks of the war, there was a great deal of talk and concern about the possibility of Russia using nuclear weapons. Putin put his nuclear forces on a higher... That was bluff. And there is no sign whatsoever that Russia is contemplating the use of a nuclear weapon.
Russia has not changed their nuclear posture. At the same time, the nuclear rhetoric is dangerous. It's weapons the way they have done over the last weeks and months. Our response is to strengthen our deterrence and defense, including by more NATO troops in the eastern part of the alliance, tens of thousands of troops under NATO command, backed by ships and planes.
Right now, or do you regard him now as a war criminal and, as they've said in the United States and some other capitals, an architect of genocide? Because if you think that, then presumably you would not believe he'd be a leader that you could...
Is a violation of international law. We have seen war crimes taking place, including by deliberate killing of civilians. Then it is for the international...
I know all that. We've all seen the pictures. I'm just asking you a very direct...
And to support all efforts to establish a judicial process and to make this an issue for instance, the International Criminal Court. Then, of course, it's also extremely important that we train to address the urgent and immediate challenge of stopping Putin's war, to support them upholding the right for self-defense. That's our focus now, and then the issue of membership has to be addressed after that.
Do you think
for our security? All NATO allies agree that the enlargement of NATO over decades has helped to spread democracy, ensure peace and stability across Europe. And it's an historic thing that Finland and Sweden applies for membership. This is not directed against anyone. It's not an aggressive action. NATO is a defensive alliance, but we, of course, respect the right for Finland and Sweden to choose their own path, including...
Are ready to lift its veto on Finland and Sweden joining?
It's not a normal, or it is actually normal that as part of accession processes in NATO, allies...
Turkey still saying it cannot support and will not support Swedish and Finnish entry into NATO.
Turkey is still saying that they have some concerns that they have raised with all the NATO allies, and of course also raised with Finland and Sweden. And then I welcome the fact that there are contacts between Ankara, Stockholm and Helsinki, and I'm confident I will find ways to address these concerns.
Before we end, I have to broaden the picture a little bit and talk about NATO in the context of other global challenges. The United States is the most important member of your organization. If there were to be a war involving the United States and China, then I assume under Article 5 NATO would get involved. Is that something that, never mind what's happening in Ukraine, that NATO is active? Let's not get too stuck on North Atlantic. I mean, you've just sent forces for years into Afghanistan. So I'm asking you whether, you know, all of these pressures and a new generation of conflict with Russia, you're also now strategically planning for potential conflict with China.
Has to be part of what we are addressing.
And a final thought then, if you consider how Beijing might be watching NATO right now, they saw the rather messy withdrawal from Afghanistan, which ended with the Taliban back in power. They see divisions emerging in NATO over what to do in Ukraine with...
And we are that not despite, but actually because the fact that we represent different countries. We are 30 different allies from both sides of the Atlantic with different history, different culture, different political parties in power. And also sometimes we disagree. But actually we are always...
Thank you much indeed for joining me on Hard Talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
वही स्वाद नया अंदाज अमूल चीज ये मेरा चीज है
Satellite image, this bulk of cloud here. This is dividing cold air that's moving its way in from the north and northwest to that warm air that's been in place in the southeast, which is clearing away now, so not as hot in the east as it has been over the past few days. Temperatures picking up, though, towards part, warming up for Paraguay and southern Brazil too. And Wednesday's weather across Europe now. It's been very hot recently through many central and southern areas. Not as warm for Portugal and for Spain. We've got a bit of a thundery breakdown as this frontal system tracks south, bringing some downpours to northern Italy. And for the north of India, not quite as hot as it was last week. Some respite, some thunderstorms around in the forecast and some heavy downpours too down towards Kerala, Tamil Nadu and across Sri Lanka as well. We've got some heavy rain lingering across southern and southeast South Australia and Victoria. 1 or 2 showers still lingering for Queensland, but things are looking drier and a little less cool and breezy for New Zealand. Bye-bye.
Being at the heart of a live news show is challenging.
This is BBC World News. I'm Matthew Emery-Waller. On today's Global, chilling new details from the heart of China's highly secretive system of mass.
I was looking through these images on my laptop in the living room. I had to get up and go somewhere else and take a break. I was overwhelmed.
It includes evidence of a shoot-to-kill policy. We speak live to the COVID pandemic and that staff felt they were permissible because the Prime Minister often popped in.
He wasn't there saying this shouldn't be happening. He wasn't saying, can everyone break up and go home?
And he won Oscars composing the music for Slumdog Millionaire. Now he's made his directorial debut at Cannes with a virtual reality film. A.R. Rahman joins us live on today's programme. Show that Uyghur prisoners in the western region of Xinjiang are shot on sight if they're caught trying to escape. Thousands of photographs shed light on a secretive system of mass incarceration. The Chinese government has dismissed as fake news claims
never intended us to see from inside its system of mass incarceration in Xinjiang. The government has long denied it's running detention camps for Uyghurs, insisting instead they are vocational schools with their Turkic language, Islamic traditions and roots in a region with a history of separatism and violence have long faced cycles of tightening government control.
Yes, this is classified internal government information.
The files said to have been hacked from police computer servers in Xinjiang by a source whose identity is unknown were first passed to Dr. Adrian Zenz, a Xinjiang scholar who in turn shared them with the contain hundreds of spreadsheets, row upon row of draconian jail sentences, often targeting expressions of Islamic faith, as a parallel method alongside the camps for detaining Uyghurs en masse. Just for growing a beard, Tursun, only his son's devout Islamic faith is listed. In response to questions, the Chinese embassy in the US issued a statement saying that in the face of the grave and complex counter-terrorism situation in Xinjiang, the authorities had taken a... It includes these images, once again from deep within the system, that appear to offer further evidence of the harsh detention and indoctrination of a people, not for what they've done, but for who they are. John Sudden.
Material in these documents, and as you can imagine, it's impossible to summarize it succinctly, but I think one of the things that may be beyond the images are the detailed police instructions that show also what weapons to use, like the watchtower guards having knowledge of it, but also giving instructions and directives to build more camps.
The pictures, the details of why some of those people are there, we saw in that piece we've just been looking at. You were...
You know, they're putting teenagers in camps. I mean, I'm an academic. I research documents, I research data, but this material is unlike anything I've ever reviewed. And seeing those images and seeing, you know, teenagers, government official who supposedly, based on a fairly vague allegation or charge, and then she is simply flagged in the automatic, the so-called integrated joint operations system, the big data policing platform. She's an automatic.
You've given in the last 24 hours, and you talked about the paranoia in the leadership. What did you mean by that?
So we scholars long thought that this is all the talk about Uyghur terrorism or counter-terrorism factor. Why this kind of counter-terrorism campaign turned into mass internment?
You will have seen.
I think it's more significant factor than what we have seen before.
You will have seen the pushback from Beijing today in terms of the justifications of what they're.
The Chinese are claiming that they've been threatened and they are preemptively putting people in vocational training schools. What we see is that it's the paranoia where the group is a classical sign of political paranoia. And that's what we see. But what they tell us, what the Chinese state tells us about the supposed boarding schools, those are just blatant lies. Those are just complete lies.
A twin final thought then, because Beijing described...
The team of Michelle Bachelet got in touch with me last year. They're well aware of my work, and I'm also have been reaching out to them in regards to the new material, seeking for it to be included in the latest report. I think the Chinese state is going to...
Now to other news, because it's been exactly 3 months since Russia invaded Ukraine. President Biden has called the war a brutal, unprovoked global crisis that...
...of the Russians now is on encircling these cities, Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. These are big industrial cities, one either side of the Seversky Donetsk River. And the way they're trying to do that is by pressuring Severodonetsk on 3 fronts, basically trying to surround the Severodonetsk and Lysychansk and try and starve out and pound with artillery the Ukrainian defenders that are there.
Now let's take a look at the day's other main global stories, because in Sri Lanka, petrol prices have gone up by 20 to 24%. Diesel prices, the boat which was bound for Malaysia, ran into trouble a few days after setting out from Myanmar's Rakhine state. It capsized near the coast of Pathin township on Saturday. More than 50 people are still missing. Insiders tell the BBC that lockdown parties in Downing Street were common during the COVID pandemic, and the Prime Minister often popped in. We'll be live at Westminster.
Day. He was the father of the Indian people from the day of independence.
The Oprah Winfrey Show comes to an end after 25 years and more than 4,500 episodes. The chat show has made her one of the richest people on the planet.
Welcome back to Global here on BBC World News. Now, speaking for the first time, insiders who attended gatherings in Downing Street during COVID lockdowns have told BBC News a fine. Here's our political correspondent, Ben Wright.
Boozy, lockdown-breaking parties in Downing Street have led to more than 100 fines and big questions for Boris Johnson. With Number 10 braced for the official report into the Partygate scandal, Panorama...
Morning after. A mess. There were bottles, empties, rubbish, in the bin but overflowing. Or indeed sometimes left on the table.
You would go into work in the morning in 10 Downing Street.
Office drinks on Friday nights.
Yes, Wine Time Fridays. Invites that were in everyone's calendar for every Friday at 4 p.m.
At 4 o'clock in the afternoon was wine time.
Yes.
2 of the people who broke the law. One staffer said they felt Boris Johnson had given permission for the events to take place because of his attendance.
He was there. He may have just been popping through on the way to his flat, because that's what would happen. You can't and go home. Can everyone socially distance? Can everyone put masks on? No, he wasn't telling anybody that. He was grabbing a glass for himself.
He was certainly at this gathering. Pictures released by ITV News show the...
Shoulder to shoulder. Some people on each other's laps.
People were sitting on each other's laps?
Yes, 1 or 2 people.
A government source said the Prime Minister attended that event in a work capacity, a message repeated by ministers this morning.
Since 1974.
At Cabinet this morning, Boris Johnson was talking about the latest job figures, but his own conduct in office caused disbelief, in the words of one staffer, when the Prime Minister first told Parliament there were no parties.
So we knew that the rules had been broken. We knew these parties happened.
The government has declined to respond to the testimony given to Panorama. The Prime Minister has promised to make a statement to Parliament as soon as the Sue Gray report is published. Johnson will soon have to explain to MPs and voters how all these gatherings were allowed to happen and who, if anyone, should take responsibility. Ben Wright, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, let's talk to our UK political correspondent, Rob Watson. He's there in Westminster. Rob, we had those pictures yesterday, these details today. The pressure is really cranking up.
In this country, which I think has pretty much solidified, you either think that what Boris Johnson did was unforgivable or you just think you shrug your shoulders. Where I think the problem comes is in whether he misled Parliament, which is obviously immensely serious and potentially a result.
And the Sue Gray report is pretty imminent, perhaps comes tomorrow. What is the mood like in the Conservative Party?
So I think the mood is very much wait and see. And I guess you'd sort of to the Conservative Party. I mean, I have to say that so far the balance has been very much with the former, those who are prepared to stick by the Prime Minister. Don't forget the great advantage that he's had until this point is that if you're going to have a political assassination, he's looking at the issue of whether the Prime Minister misled Parliament. I mean, it could all get very, very sticky indeed. On the other hand, Matthew, we've said that before, haven't we?
Rob Watson, there at Westminster. Thanks very much for that. Thank you. The service just a few days ago after 13 years of construction. The project has been delayed by about 3.5 years and has gone about $5 billion over budget. Here's our transport correspondent, Katie Austin.
Opportunity, transport line in a city like London opening, it probably won't happen again in my lifetime.
The journey time between Canary Wharf and Whitechapel blew my mind.
The line links Reading in Berkshire with Shenfield in Essex. Passengers. The Crossrail project is opening 3.5 years late. One new station, Bond Street, still isn't ready, and its budget has swelled to £18.5 billion. But it is seen as a hugely impressive engineering achievement.
Crossrail is
Passenger number forecasts for the Elizabeth line's first few years have been scaled back, but Transport for London insists it's still needed.
This railway isn't built for today or tomorrow, it's built for the next 100 to 150 years, and we're very confident that this is a catalyst now for the post-pandemic.
Hello there. Recent torrential downpours across parts of northeast India and Bangladesh have caused some devastating flooding problems. Things are looking a little bit dry there, thankfully. The southern Bay of Bengal, pushing into southern parts of Sri Lanka, Myanmar as well. So bringing some heavy downpours there through the course of Wednesday. Meanwhile, further north, some of those showers still affecting parts of Kerala, Tamil Nadu, one or two also across the likes of dry though for the likes of Andhra Pradesh. But we're seeing some showers for West Bengal and across Bangladesh. Here's the outlook for Dhaka. Some heavy showers and thunderstorms arrive by Sunday. Islamabad turning a bit hotter, 40 degrees by the time we get to Friday. Meanwhile, cooler.
BBC Real. Throughout history, groups known as cults have led ordinary people to believe unbelievable things.
Why do people join cults?
The message of the cult or the cult leader, it has to resonate with the person, right? When people
over meeting with people over coffee, I'm not knowing that I was getting drawn into a cult. That's the crazy thing about it. It could easily happen to anyone.
Watch more stories like this at bbc.com/real.
Russia. Join me, Sarah Rainsford, here on BBC World News.
With prices soaring, a shortage of workers and warnings of recession, world leaders are gathering in Davos, and the meeting's founder tells me how they can fix the problems.
And accounts from the people who were there. These important events from the past help us to understand the world that we live in today. Join me, Humza Fislani, for Witness History on BBC World News.
Piece the story together with Ros Atkins, Outside Source on BBC World News.
This is BBC World News. I'm Matthew Amreliwala. On today's Global, chilling new detail from police files passed to the BBC. The oldest person it mentions is in their 70s, whilst the youngest is aged just 15.
I was looking through these images on my laptop in the living room. I had to get up.
Now he's made his directorial debut at Cannes with a virtual reality film. A.R. Rahman talks music, smell and interactive seats as he joins us live on the programme. And territorial integrity of Ukraine. Russia's current focus is to capture the last parts of the Luhansk region as part of its campaign to control the wider Donbass area. Well, as normal, at about this time, we're joined by our World Affairs editor, John Simpson. And John...
Russian army was a steamroller which would move into Ukraine, capture the capital in 96 hours. Many Western diplomats and military people believed this. So discovered thousands of cases of war crimes. So it's been a really vicious 3 months, and it's causing food shortages right around the world.
Seeing there on the screen.
Well, if you can see, there's an area of Ukrainian territory, Ukrainian-held territory, which the Russians are trying to cut off the edge of the country. We're not talking about the original intention, which was to take over the entire country and put in a government which was supportive of Russia.
And just in the last few minutes, both the Ukrainian government...
Worse. I mean, this is the fog of war, frankly, and these things happen, and you can't just believe everybody that says anything.
A quick word about prisoner exchanges, because President Zelensky was intimating it could even happen by today.
International observers, they want it for their own propaganda purposes.
A final word, John, about food, because yesterday Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister was talking about some sort of land corridor. I was talking to Lithuania's foreign minister to safeguard food supplies around the Black Sea area, and how risky putting people on the ground.
Well, I think it's safe to say it can only be done with Russia's agreement. The idea is just as bad as sending Western aircraft over Ukraine. Not a possibility if you want to make sure that the thing doesn't get much wider. So Russia would have to agree.
So exactly as John was saying, conflicting analysis of what is actually happening on the ground. Now let's pause from all of that. Let's catch up with the business news of the day. And Ben is here. And what do you have for us?
Well, it's all very connected, Matthew. It's connected to the situation in Ukraine and the severe food shortages. Now, all of this echoes concerns raised by the Ukrainian government, as well as wider accusations that the Kremlin is deliberately targeting food supplies. The Polish Prime Minister, Mateusz Morawiecki,
the World Economic Forum is typically about high finance and high politics, but we've been discussing incessantly and understandably this issue of food security and food prices, and not just the economics of it, but the sort of geopolitical, diplomatic and trade. In a way, truly astonishing to imagine that a large swathe of the people I've been talking to here don't just think that these high food prices and concerns about food availability are an unfortunate consequence of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but they well.
Some Western European leaders wanted to have cheap natural resources and peace. And what they got instead is the very expensive raw materials and natural resources.
That President Putin, the Kremlin, is using grain stocks, the threat of famine, as a form of leverage in this conflict.
Stalin has done this in Ukraine in 1933 already, so it's a kind of tradition for direction and a cry for solution.
And therefore, does the West, NATO, need to get involved in helping break the naval blockade with some sort of humanitarian corridor? When you want unity in Europe, can we really be thinking about a trade war between the EU and the UK over the Brexit deal, over the Northern Ireland Protocol?
well, like trade wars are a lose-lose situation. Poland wants to be as strong.
Were present in Davos in a huge way. The big banks and energy companies would sponsor things. There was a Russia house that's been turned into a Russian war crimes house, taken over by the Ukrainians here in Davos. And Ukrainians are certainly types of recession in Europe, concern about the impact of those high energy prices and food prices, double supply shock. But in America, a different type of concern. Demand seems to be spiraling, and the Federal Reserve reining in the US economy to get trouble. And the fundamental factors here can't necessarily be dealt with by economics alone. They're diplomatic, they're geopolitical, they rely on decisions made in the Kremlin and elsewhere.
Okay, Faisal, thank you very much. Faisal Islam, our economics editor there at Want to import it?
It's not. Hello, sorry. The question is very simple, and the answer is clear and simple. It's not possible to in Ukraine, digesting 6 million tons, which is like 5-6 times larger need. And all of this grain is still in Ukraine. We have about 25 million tons of grain to export, and we are about to start harvesting normal, I would say, crop.
In other countries that need it?
Yes, I would put it even to be more precise. Regarding the surplus, we will be covered intra-country needs-wise for 10-15 years if we aren't able to export everything. Australia. But what's going to happen to prices? And whenever we talk about hunger, we talk about people who simply will not be able, larger and larger number of people will not be able to afford to buy such an expensive basic food like bread and so on. And there's going to be a lot of excessive grain in Ukraine, and I think there will be skyrocketing prices, which will shock the third countries, the destinations, import-dependent countries.
Okay. Bogdan Kostevsky, thank you very much for speaking to us.
I'll be talking to A.R. Rahman live from the Cannes Film Festival.
At 70 years, Elicon's story is that of engineering.
That's Elicon at 70.
Elicon, celebrating 70 years of excellence.
Wallonia, a way of life where creation thrives. Continuously striving.
Indulge in the luxurious, the most spacious, and supremely comfortable BMW 3 Series Grand Limousine. Welcome to the grand side of thrill.
Welcome back to Global here on BBC World News. Now, what do you do if you've won 2 Oscars, 2 Grammys, Golden Globes, BAFTAs? It's a very long list.
Oh, it was amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much. That was exquisite. Good job. That was the most magical, immersive experience ever.
So she's a big fan of perfumes, and she's got like 250 things on her table. And just as a thing to please her, I said, "Oh, I don't even do a movie called about perfumes and having perfumes as a narrative with the music and all the stuff."
We're showing pictures of people in their seats with their masks and viewfinders on, and the smells that are being wafted across them. I mean, talk me through how it works, because on the face of it, it seems so different in terms of your...
So I took courses on script writing and, imaging at MIT and all that stuff. And it led me to find my own path in cinematic sensory projects.
You've got to be really careful the devices don't end up becoming the story. The storytelling is so critical. And this is a story, and we're going to put a clip on the screen as you speak to us. It's a story, it's shot in Italy, and it's a film about revenge, isn't it?
And care and compassion towards the viewer. So they come back again to watch more.
Yes.
That's the reason why we took so long to stitch the whole thing and make sure that's such a seamless experience. Yeah.
You've done a Just a quick one on that, because I've always wanted to know, when did you know and sit down and think to yourself, I've written something that I think is...
who's so profound, and his taste of music is extraordinary. I feel like it's a winning game for me. I was thrilled to work with my favorites, Sukhinder Singh, Gulzar, MIA, and I had the most fun time.
Well, it's a long list, as I said, of things you've done since that project. I mean, I've got it here. You did the Dubai Expo in 2021, Blinded by the Light in 2019, a film about Pele in 2016, 127. Now, returning to Cannes, and that's where you are, India is being celebrated as the country of honour this year. I mean, Indian film, way beyond Bollywood, it has exploded. Why do you think that is? Prime, all of that. A final quick thought. We're nearly out of time. I know you are one of the founders of India's premier music higher education institutes. What do you say to young people? What's your best bit of advice? Can you deconstruct how you become a composer?
And first, learning, of course, is important.
Yes.
But involving and learning from the mistakes, or being faithful, trustful, trustworthy, and all this human, integrity is so important.
Good advice. And be yourself and
wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Hello, time now for our latest look around the world of weather. We will start off in Australia, a weather front taking some quite intense as it moves its way further east through Europe, and quite windy in Scandinavia to the west, where it's been really hot. Not as hot. This system taking some heavier rain northwards through parts of Argentina, eventually will push into Uruguay and Paraguay. Another
BMW 3 Series Grand Limousine. Welcome to the grand side of thrill.
This programme asks plain questions with the help of the unrivalled range of BBC journalists right across the world. And gathered here in this building, I'll also draw my time world.
On BBC World News.
Highly secretive system of mass incarceration of Uyghurs and other minorities. The faces from what Beijing calls re-education camps, part of hacked data from police files passed to the BBC. The oldest person in the documents is in their 70s, the youngest just 15.
I was looking through these images on my laptop in the living room to get out.
Who researched the leaked documents. Also on today's programme. 3 months on since Russia invaded Ukraine, President Biden calls the war a brutal, unprovoked global crisis. And insiders tell the BBC that lockdown parties in Hello and welcome back to today's global documents. Seen by the BBC that are said to have been hacked from Chinese police computers showed that Uyghur prisoners in the western region of Xinjiang.
Incarceration in Xinjiang. The government has long denied it's running detention camps for Uyghurs, insisting instead they are vocational schools for willing students. The photo separatism and violence have long faced cycles of tightening government control. And with mounting criticism over the camps, the authorities have taken a tower guarded by 2 officers equipped with sniper rifles and machine guns. Inside, lessons are watched over by police carrying shields, batons and handcuffs. And the documents describe the response to students shoot them dead.
Yes, this is classified internal government information.
The files, said to have been hacked from police computer servers in Xinjiang by a source whose identity remains unknown, were first passed to Dr. Adrian Zenz, a Xinjiang scholar who
Took a break. I was overwhelmed.
The hacked files also contain hundreds of spreadsheets, row upon row of draconian jail sentences, often targeting expressions of Islamic faith, as a parallel method built alongside the camps. The data can be verified, shown to contain real people, Abdurrahman Hassan has not seen his wife and children since he left Xinjiang in 2017. 16 years in prison for a vague offence that appears time and again, gathering a crowd to disturb the social order. You can see how her spirit is broken, he tells me. And lies. Xinjiang is stable, prosperous, and the people have happy lives, he said. But there's been no attempt to address the evidence itself, which includes these images from deep within the system. Further evidence of the
terrorism in a region that does have a history of simmering separatism and some violence. But the suspicion, of course, has always been, based on the evidence we've had over the past few years, the satellite photos of the camps, some of the testimony who've been able to speak about this, the suspicion has always been that this is about something much bigger, about the framing of a people as a threat based on their identity, the idea that something about Uyghur identity, culture, is new layers of evidence across multiple sets of documents to show the way that process is being enacted. The tens of thousands of rows of spreadsheet data showing sentence after sentence for the most ordinary displays of...
The amount of data, the amount of documentation, what do you then make of the denials?
Well, you know, we've had a response from the Chinese government, both from the Chinese embassy, were the words used by the Foreign Ministry's spokesperson in Beijing. But they've done very little to address the specific evidence. It seems very hard when you look at those photos to dismissals from China. But I think, you know, looking at this body of evidence, nothing yet that actually attempts to address the substance of it.
John, a final thought, because the UN Human Rights Chief is in Beijing.
What we've also seen and what these documents show is that if there is a shift away from the re-education camps, it is being replaced with the use of formal prisons and these long arbitrary sentences targeting the most ordinary aspects and expressions.
New York, thanks very much for that. Thank you. Now to Ukraine, because it's been exactly 3 months since Russia invaded the country. Weapons deliveries. Joe Inwood has the latest from Kyiv.
The effort of the Russians now is on encircling these cities, Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. These are big industrial cities, one either side of the Seversky Donets River. And the way they're trying to do that...
Pandemic, and the Prime Minister often popped in. Downing Street has just responded. We'll be live at Westminster for more on that story. Welcome back to the programme here on BBC World News. Now, at the Leaving Party and the Metropolitan Police are facing calls to explain why the Prime Minister wasn't issued with a fine. Here's our political correspondent, Ben Wright.
Boozy, lockdown-breaking parties in Downing Street have led to more than 100 fines and big...
Rubbish in the bin, but overflowing. Or indeed sometimes left on the table.
You would go into work in the morning in 10 Downing Street and find empty bottles littered around the place.
Yep.
For the first time, people...
Yes, Wine Time Fridays. Invites that were in everyone's calendar for every Friday at 4 p.m.
At 4 o'clock in the afternoon was wine time.
Yes.
Two of the people who've spoken to the BBC on condition...
He may have just been popping through on the way to his flat because that's what would happen. You know, he wasn't there saying this shouldn't be happening. He wasn't saying, can everyone break up and go home? Can everyone socially distance? Can everyone put...
Describe the do.
There was about 30 people, if not more, in a room. Everyone was stood shoulder to shoulder. Some people on each other's laps.
People were sitting on each other's laps?
Yes, 1 or 2 people.
A government source said the
boxes in, raised a glass to say thank you to a leaving member of staff who we would have been working with closely all the way through, and then presumably left, and the police will have had all of that information, which is why they didn't issue him a fixed penalty notice in this case.
Like, why? Why is he denying this? When we've been with him this entire time, we knew that the rules had been broken. We knew these parties happened.
The Prime Minister has promised to make a statement to Parliament.
An investigation, that the police explain why they've reached the conclusions they have.
And Boris Johnson will soon have to explain to MPs and voters how all these gatherings were allowed to happen and who, if anyone, should take.
And just set the scene for us, because we had those new pictures yesterday, we've had these new details today, and potentially tomorrow, or certainly very soon, we're going to get the full Sue Gray report, aren't we?
We are, and I think my colleague's country. But the issue that he faces, and if you combine those photos and the insider testimony that the BBC has now put together, is it's quite difficult to square it all with Boris Johnson repeatedly telling Parliament that there were no parties.
3 million pesos, or $24,000 US dollars, after a photo emerged of them at a birthday celebration for the First Lady in July 2020, when the country was under strict lockdown, banning all gatherings, including funerals.
This is Her Royal Majesty Queen Angelique Monet. Born in America, now the wife of a Nigerian king. How do you want to be addressed, Olori, Your Highness Queen Angelique?
Well, I am actually the Yeye Lua Olori of Etioni, and for Etioni and our people, and I'm just really happy to be here. It's just like a fairy tale that came true.
How did you meet your husband, the king?
That's a really good question. We get asked that a lot. Well, we've known of each other, and we've known each other give to the people, then it makes your job a lot easier.
And what Queen Angelique gave to the people here, especially the children.
This is Milk. Milk, I would like you to meet all of our friends again. I already know who they are. Yes, I know that you know. It's Etioni Cocoa, the oldest cocoa plantation.
And we became friends after.
But is the acting life truly over for Queen Angelique?
Actually, His Majesty and I are working on a few film projects and some animations, as well as telling the history of our kingdom and the good work we're doing. So
It's on a slack line of 2.2 kilometres across the bay. Last year, he made that extraordinary journey from the Eiffel Tower to the Charleroi Theatre on a 200-foot rope above the ground.
Across the southern Bay of Bengal, pushing into southern parts of Sri Lanka, Myanmar as well, so bringing some heavy downpours there through the course of Wednesday. Meanwhile, further north, some of those showers still affecting parts of Kerala, Tamil Nadu, one or two also across west of India, so some respite from the searing heat that we had earlier in the week. Further south, a few showers for Kerala, perhaps the Maldives catching one or two, and for southern Sri Lanka, some heavy showers and some thunderstorms. Largely dry, though, for the likes of Andhra Pradesh, but we're seeing...
Check the facts behind the stories making the headlines. Go to the BBC News website and app to answer any questions you have about the big stories of the day. Reality Check. Get the facts straight.
Indulge in the luxurious, the most spacious, and supremely comfortable BMW 3 Series Grand Limousine.
Kiev not only left burned-out tanks around the capital, the bodies of hundreds of its soldiers were also abandoned here. Weeks later, Ukraine says Moscow shows no interest in getting them back. For more, join me, Sarah Rainsford, here on BBC World News.
And now the unfolding conflict in Ukraine have disrupted supply chains and exacerbated the rise in prices, leaving people on the edge of crisis. To find out more, join us for our Global Cost of Living series on BBC World News.
Of the Luhansk region. Insiders have told the BBC that lockdown parties in Downing Street were common during the COVID pandemic. They say that staff felt they were permissible because the Prime Minister often popped in. and the President of Argentina, Alberto Fernandez, and the first.
Now on BBC World News, all the tech to revolutionise business and personal life. It's Click.
Fine.
We're going to find out whether sea life and sea machines can happily coexist.
This is a harbour seal, and this is what we're looking for in the data.
Shona takes control of this monster.
Paul gets up close to this beast.
Oh.
In 2019.
And one of the best places to have a wind farm is at sea, where there's lots of wind and also lots of space. But how do you look after it? Well, Paul Carter's taken the plunge to find out.
No, these are often maintained by human divers, working in challenging and hazardous conditions. But here at Heriot-Watt University, they're developing underwater robotic solutions to help take the strain. And they've come up with this, the Orca Autonomous.
You've got forward, backwards, left, right, up, down, and then you've got roll, pitch and turn.
Oh wow, so it's pretty manoeuvrable then?
Yes.
All of this technology allows the device to work autonomously, planning its own route to fully scan a structure.
To create a 3D model of the structure under the water. These can be viewed by the engineers and by the surveyors to detect problems early when they're able to be fixed easily and cost effectively.
Currently,
thousands of offshore wind farms. If you've got 10,000 wind turbines to inspect, and if you have one person, one vehicle, you need 10,000 pilots, and you don't have them. They don't exist. We're going to need to replace or change the way we do.
What's really fascinating is how autonomous robots like this could allow for further innovation, solving problems like the expansion of wind farms held back by the sheer practicalities of people.
It's also known as an uncrewed surface vessel, which can take to the seas to inspect projects in far-flung locations which are difficult to get to.
Autonomously operated vehicles like this are really important for the environment because the definition images feed all that stuff back via satellite to the guys in Aberdeen. By deploying these types of vehicles, there's a potential to reduce fuel consumption by as much as 95% in comparison with conventional ones.
Orca being the first of a fleet of 3 or 4 that we expect to have by the end of this year, and then we're looking to expand the fleet with larger vessels that are capable of conducting operations in the even more hazardous environments with greater weather endurance limit.
Visual data from the cameras. So if we were on a wind farm, as you see the wind farm coming up from the sea, it's actually a big structure underneath that goes to the seabeds and attached there. So we'll be looking at the fixings to the seabed, the metal structure itself. They're all connected.
For essential work that needs to take place out at sea.
That was Paul and Shona all at sea.
Now, with more and more tech being used above and below the water, have you ever wondered how it affects the creatures that live
with nature?
So in this particular area, we've lost about 85% of our harbour seals.
So how do we protect them whilst quenching our thirst for clean energy?
Tidal has a role. The wind doesn't always blow. Tidal always keeps...
It's developed as wind power.
Barnacles on there?
Those are barnacles on there.
Barnacles on it. So this one's already been underwater?
This has been in the water for about 2 years. This turbine does get barnacle growth on it, and then that becomes food for fish. During slack tide, there are little feeding grounds. And the question is then, as the flow increases and the turbine goes into production and the blades spin faster, do the fish remain? Do the predators come back? Do we have an impact on those predators? And is it a detrimental impact?
And it's crucial to develop.
See on the end of the slip down here. Yeah, so some of the initial research was actually designed to look at how animals are actually using some of these habitats, how they're using these highly tidal areas around the north coast of Scotland. And we are...
In sensor technologies we've got on it are the active sonars we're using for tracking seals primarily because they don't make much noise underwater. So these send out a very, very high frequency ping, which is too loud for the animals to hear and be disturbed by. Then they listen for the echo.
Wow, okay.
But they're inside all of this with a whole load of steel clamped in there too, just to make the thing heavy enough to lie on the seafloor.
But no one. Scotland begins. Jonna Gross.
Quite close to the sonar. And what we see here is this bright target coming in. This is a harbour seal, and this is what we're looking for in the data once we're deployed.
But this was just a test. Inside the substation, Douglas and Gordon are waiting to see if it's going to work.
We haven't deployed our equipment yet, but it will happen today for sure. But as anyone who's worked at sea will know, nothing ever goes quite according to plan.
But the moment finally arrives. Remember that umbilical moment. Is it going to connect? Is it going to switch on? And after years in the making, it's not good news.
Everything went together, but nothing came to life.
But they've not...
Indulge in the luxurious, the most almond butter.
Hello, I'm Ross Atkins with Outside Source. This is the extraordinary story of climate change. Vaccines, Ukraine. Let's look at some of the international reaction. Tell us what you've been hearing.
It's a white light smart stage. See, here at Portsmouth University's multi-million-pound brand new centre for making all things virtual reality. Come with me, I'll give you a quick tour. The centre also has motion capture, but to show you that, I first need to get into one of these. There are 48 cameras in this room tracking my every move. This studio's already been used by the Royal Shakespeare Company to create a digital production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. A serious reason to consider using it professionally.
Sustainability, for example, I was due to give a keynote address to University of Michigan. Normally I would have flown over there, but now I'm doing it from our smart stage facility here. So that's a significant carbon saving over flying.
This Tesla suit, no relation to the car, aims to fix that with dozens of sensors that can be programmed to make your skin tingle in every sense. There's one here in Portsmouth, although it's not yet ready for me to try out. But if people are put off VR by the challenge facing the extended reality market that this centre aims to directly address, some say there simply isn't enough good content to keep people interested. Isn't that right, Tuong?
There's still limited amounts of content, right? In that sense, it's worth of programming per day. So that's a challenge in terms of getting people to adopt. Camera rolling.
Meanwhile, in this studio, you can be videoed in 3D. It's called volumetric capture, and once you've been recorded...
City's best respected stage venues. But now, here at its studio, it's also been working hard on its digital offerings.
Originally just a virtual reality experience, All Kinds of Limbo is a setup that could be in VR, on a normal computer screen, or in augmented reality via a phone or tablet.
It's quite nice I can make it appear in the room, but I think I'd appreciate it a lot more if I was at home and it was appearing in my living room. I want to dance it all.
We had Nubia, our actress, in our volumetric capture studio. We recorded her performance, with about 120 cameras all set around her, and we then process that through some technology that allows us to create a portal onto that experience. It's not quite the same, it doesn't feel the same. And then the desktop experience, which I think we can all see sort of plays really as a sort of enhanced screen.
The idea here is about...
I think what we're exploring here is most definitely a new future. It's not the new future. We will never ever replace live performance on stage. However, with the technologies that are available and with the...
And that's it for this week's edition of Lyra Dances in VR Goggles.
I'll do it off camera next week.
Would you mind? Thank you very much. Anyway, that is it from us for now.
We will be back very soon.
Thanks for watching.
Bye-bye.
Hello there. After the recent heat, some sweeping heavy rain, squally winds and isolated tornadoes through the lower Mississippi Valley towards the Appalachians and right up towards the Great Lakes too. Meanwhile, for South America, some heavy rain pushing north across the north of Argentina and Uruguay as well. Cooler air in place later in the weekend. Across the Middle East, we've had a lot of dust storms recently. Still some brisk winds across the Gulf through central Saudi Arabia. Still some problems with visibility, but generally those brisk winds should be easing out and temperatures hotting up. Not as hot as not as chilly as it has been. Bye for now.
This is a residential building. There's a real sense that the danger, the conflict is coming closer, and a feeling here now that nowhere.
Just 3 years before, was now facing down the world's second most powerful army.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In-depth programming on BBC World News.
I want to talk to you about the politics of